Turn to Joshua chapter 2. We're looking at Joshua 2. And we're talking about a woman named Rahab. Her name is interesting. The Ra part of it is the name of an Egyptian god, and it was the prefix of many names at this time. But the name Rahab together, the second part of that means fierce or insolent. We don't use insolent. I had to look it up to know exactly what it means. And the dictionary definition was insulting and bold rudeness. Oh, horrors, I was insolent. So we said that the woman at the well might have been a woman with a little chutzpah and would take it to you. But this woman might have been over the top in that. She was an Amorite, Amorite. It was a horribly pagan culture. Not only did they worship idols and sacrifice their children to idols, they practiced regularly every kind of sexual immorality and perversion. So she had a pretty bad culture. Does culture influence you?
Yes, absolutely.
Even when we know our culture is not godly, it still has an influence. And then, what was her line of work? She was a prostitute. She ran a house of ill repute. She ran an inn. Now, I was interested in my study to find people that lived back in the 1800s. They really tried to say she was not a prostitute. She was just an innkeeper. And it was interesting to look at the gymnastics they went through to do that. But the men who are knowledgeable of Hebrew and Greek say the word both in the New Testament and in the Old Testament always and only mean prostitute. They don't ever mean anything else. Well, interesting woman. Do you got a picture? All right. Ever known anybody that far along in the path of sin?
Survivor. She sounds like a survivor.
She does. An angry survivor. We'll see more of her character as we go through in some strange ways. But I want you to understand the position. If you have your map there, look at the Jordan River that comes down from the Sea of Galilee in the middle. And goes all the way down to the Dead Sea. Find Jericho down in the purple country, right at the eastern border. And then the Israelites were in that pink country, about as far from the Jordan as Jericho was from the Jordan, which is a distance of about 15 miles. And there are mountains coming down here and mountains coming down here, and this was a plain. So if the air was clear, they could have actually seen each other, especially if they were up on the mountain base just a little bit. And Joshua sends two spies to assess their first obstacle. God promised them this land. He told them they were going to have to fight for it. They've been 40 years in the wilderness because of their sin. They're finally there. Joshua's the commander-in-chief, and he sends some spies. Some people say that Joshua was afraid, and that's why he sent spies to case out Jericho. I don't think he was afraid. I think he was a very good general. You know, when you face an obstacle, do you need to understand what that obstacle is? Well, the Jordan is an obstacle between the two people, and God's going to take care of that one, but Joshua has to deal with the battle. As I thought about this, I thought about how poorly Americans identify obstacles and deal with them. You kind of have to know something about the obstacle to deal with it. Joshua is casing out something that God's already told him he's going to be able to conquer. But if you are casing out an obstacle in your life and God's already told you he would conquer it, like prayer for family members. I know some of you well, and you've been praying for family members for many years. Well, because it hasn't happened and you feel that obstacle pain in your life, does that mean quit praying? No, that means be more diligent. God has promised to provide for our needs. So does that mean that we just squander whatever we have in our hands? No, we're going to be diligent about that. I stopped a long time in my study right here and thought about obstacles in my own life that I need to case out and make a plan about. Well, look at verses 2 and 3. The spies come in, 2 men. We find out later they are young men. But the king of Jericho knew that they came in. Verse 2 says he knew, and he sent to Rahab's house. There came in some men tonight from the children of Israel. I don't know how they knew. Maybe their accent, maybe their dress. Maybe it was a small town and everybody knew everybody, and when a stranger was there. And the king of Jericho sent to Rahab in verse 3 a message. Get those men to me, and I'm going to take care of them. We know they came in your house, and they've come to spy out the country. And surprisingly to me, the first part of verse 4, what does Rahab do immediately? She hid them. Now, in fact, the Bible indicates she hid them before she talked to the messenger that came to her house. This is kind of a strange behavior. What would the king of a pagan city do to somebody who harbored enemies to their kingdom? What might happen to somebody who turned over enemies? Reward. Oh, so Rahab, on the spur of the moment, made a decision to do something that could have been dangerous and could have taken away a reward. We know from down in verse 6, she took them up to the roof of her house, which was on the Jericho wall, and hid them with stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. Now, as I read this, I kind of wondered if Rahab had ever hid anybody else that was in her house. She immediately had a good plan. And then I was kind of shocked that Rahab had flax on a roof to dry. Proverbs 31, talking about the virtuous woman, says she seeks out wool and flax and works with her hands. I would think Rahab had a better income from her first line of work. This kind of tells me something about her. Maybe she couldn't be still. I don't know. I put a flax plant on your paper there up in the corner. It looks kind of like wheat, and the top has seeds. And if you're into health things, you've ever bought flaxseed oil, you know they're very valuable and that's expensive. And then the fibers could be woven into huge ropes like ships used, to like twine, into coarse material like burlap, or into good material like linen, or even into lace. So it was a very valuable commodity up there. Well, she made that decision. She brought him up and hid him under the flax. Let's look at the last part of verse 4. And this is her answer to the people at her door for the message from the king. Bring those men out to me. Look at what she says. There came men unto me, but I didn't know where they came from. And it came to pass about the time of the shutting of the gate, the city gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. And where they went, I don't know. But go after them quickly, and you can probably catch them. What do you notice about what she said? It was a lie. That's interesting. Now, the same people who said she wasn't a prostitute, she was an innkeeper, said it wasn't a lie, it was a military strategy. So is it okay to tell the truth if tell a lie if something good comes out of it? You have any problem with that? Our culture does. What is the greater good? That is why there's a lot of lying in politics and a lot of dealing under the table. And people are doing things you don't know about and they lie about it for the greater good. What does the Bible say? Thou shalt not bear false witness. That means lie. The Bible also says in the Old and the New Testament, all men are liars. All women are liars. All of us sweet ladies in here have told a lie. Well, it's interesting to me. I put some references on the bottom of your sheet there from the New Testament. We'll make our first reference to them right now. In the Hebrews 11 reference, verse 31, what is Rahab called? Rahab the harlot. You might want to circle that on your paper. Look in the James passage that is next to it. She is mentioned. What is she called? She wasn't called Rahab the liar. She was called by her worst sin, I guess. Well, being somebody who was an Ammonite, was so used to lying as a way of life, I think we see a woman who doesn't know that this is not how you're supposed to do it. I know when I came to Christ, I had a lot of things to learn that I didn't know about what God desired. I didn't know lying lips were an abomination to God. That would have helped me. So this is a woman that she seems to be coming to faith in Israel's God, and yet she's still untaught. I wonder if the first Israelites she's ever met are these two young spies. Because where have they been for the last 40 years? Out in the desert. There wasn't any back and forth. Did she know anything about the rules that God had made for his people? Where are those rules in the Bible? Exodus and again in Deuteronomy. So were they written down at this time? They were, because Moses is dead. Now this is a hard one. Where are those scrolls? In the Ark of the Covenant. People didn't have a scroll. She had no way to know what those things said. And she had no way to know what was right. I remember when James was in seminary, he came back home and we talked about a missions class he had where a missionary in Africa was trying to teach God's rules to the people there. And there was a chief who had interest in the things of God, but he had 25 wives. And so the missionary said to him, well, God says you can just have one wife. And the man went home and killed 24. See, it's hard to... people who know nothing, they need to know it all, but you have to be careful the way you say it and how you say it. So I do not fault her for being a liar. She was just a product of the Amorite culture. Now, I believe it was still wrong. But I just understand there's some things you have to learn. So I think that's why she's not called Rahab the liar. I pray for some people, and I think they live in such a culture, there is no one who will tell them the truth. God can still speak to their heart. Because if you'll look at your text, look what she says to the guys under the flax on the roof. Look at verse 8 says, she came up to the roof. What a testimony she gives. She said to them, I know that the Lord, that's the Yahweh word, the God of the Israelites, has given you the land, and your terror has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you, for we have heard how your God dried up the water of the Red Sea. How long ago was that? 40 plus, long time. When ye came out of Egypt, and what ye did to the 2 kings of the Amorites, they've already been fighting on that other side of Jordan, which were on the other side of Jordan, their names there, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts, what? Melted in fear. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. Whew, what a testimony about God. And God put that on the heart of a woman without scriptures, without priests, without ever meeting another believer. If that helps you know how to pray for someone. Look down at the James passage there. That says that she received the spies. Do you see what I'm talking about? James 2:25. In the New Testament, there are almost 100 words that can be translated receive. This is a very strong word, and it's only used 3 times. It was used when Martha received Jesus into her home. She wanted him. She wanted him there. And it was used when Jesus saw Zacchaeus up in that tree, and he said, come down, I must go to your house. It says, Zacchaeus came down with joy and received Jesus, in spite of all the crowd that rolled their eyes and said, why is he going there? It's an intense word. I think when she saw these spies and realized who they were, her mind was already made up. I'm on that side. I'm not on this side anymore. And she has fear of the Lord. The Bible says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And all of us sin because at that moment we do not have fear of the Lord. We have fear of not having our way. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. If you look at the Hebrews passage, verse 31, this is an interesting one. Hebrews 11:31. It's one printed at the bottom of your page. I'm sorry, this is from my Bible and I couldn't get those colors off. 31. By faith, the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not. All of these people heard the same thing. They heard the stories, but instead of faith in that God, they did not believe. When I put that by another passage, I've given you the reference. It's Hebrews 4:2. The writer is talking about the gospel being preached, and it says the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. Same evidence. One lady believes. Everybody else in town has no faith and does not believe. That's an amazing difference. She didn't have the worst sin. That's unbelief. That's worse than being a prostitute. She certainly didn't believe because she had an exemplary life, did she? We know her job. We know that she lied. She didn't believe because she had a sweeter disposition. I think she was hardened. I think you'd have to be in that profession. And I don't think she cared that she alienated a lot of men from their wives. She was a sinner, but she had faith in God. Well, look at verse 12 and 13. She says to the men, because of what she believes, I pray you swear to me by that God. Now that's better than the double dog dare, That's an oath with oomph. Since I have showed you kindness, that you will show kindness unto my Father's house, and give me a true token or promise, and that you will save alive my father, my mother, my brothers, and my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. She doesn't ask anything for herself, but her life. For her family, she asks for their goods. And the young men in verse 14, they say, our life for yours, if you don't mention what's gone on here. And then in verse 15 and 16, it says, she let them down by a cord through the window. That Hebrew word is more closely associated with a rope. For her house was on the town wall, and she lived on the wall. And she must have had the highest house and the highest roof, or she couldn't have hidden them up on her roof if anybody else could look down on it. So from what we know about the height of that wall, that was maybe 3 stories up. And she let them down. She must have been strong. And she gave him some good advice. She said, you go to the mountain. Instead of you go back to your people, she said, you go this way and hide there, because she knew where they would look for him. There are a place you can ford the Jordan River that is close in between there, although you could not ford it at this time because it was harvest time and the waters overflowed the bank. But they probably came over at the ford. Actually, she kind of saved them twice, didn't she? She saved them from those first messengers from the king, and then she saved them from those who were out there hunting for him at this time. And then the text goes back, and it talks about a conversation that they have had. They said, we're blameless of your oath, but when we come back, bind this line of scarlet thread in the window. And that's a different word. It's not a rope word. It's a word for a tightly woven, embroidered trim. You ever made drapes and put a trim? What am I trying to think of, Marcia? Not tassels, but a tightly woven braid of something that you got at Hobby Lobby on a spool. That stuff is very strong. It's on very heavy material, and you could swing by it. So this may be something, an intricate weaving that she had made. I'm surprised to see a prostitute that does handwork. How about you? But she did. She said they told her to put that in the window. And look at 19 and 20. Whoever shall go out of the doors of your house when we're in this battle, his blood will be on his own head. And whoever's in your house, his blood will be on our head, if any hand be on him. And if you talk to anybody about this, the deal is off. And verse 21, she said, all right. And look at that. 21, the middle of it. She sent them away, and they left. And she did what? She tied that red rope in the window then. She didn't say, now I have some brown trim that would not be so conspicuous. Would that be all right? And if anybody said, Rahab, do you know there's a red piece of trim hanging out your window? She didn't care. She's going to do what they told her to do. Ladies, may we have that response when God speaks to our heart to do what God tells us to do. No excuses, no matter what anybody else says, no matter if it seems to work out right at the moment. If God tells us to do it, we do it. If you've ever had the experience of being a manager at work, you are very grateful when your employees do what they're supposed to do. But that is nothing, I think, compared to a parent whose child obeys them. Not for money, but because they love their parents. That's the most precious obedience. And that's the obedience that Rahab had. Well, verse 22 says they went up in the mountains, like she said, stayed there 3 days until all the people searching for them returned. And the pursuers sought them everywhere, but they couldn't find them. And then verse 23 and 24, they go back and give a report to Joshua. Look at verse 24. Are they filled with confidence? They are. They said, Joshua, even everybody there is scared of us already. When in fact they might have been scared of Jericho. Well, in chapters 3 through 6, God opens up the Jordan, lets the people pass through. The Bible tells us they had not circumcised the men since they left Egypt, and they had a surgery center day, and the men were circumcised. And then it was the time of year to follow the Passover, and they kept the Passover. And the day after the Passover, God stopped sending manna. Now they could buy stored grain from this land where they were going. Joshua met with that mysterious one who called himself the captain of the Lord's host. But we know that this was probably an appearance of Christ because Joshua worshiped that man. And Joshua got his battle plan from God. Now they have a lot of battles in the Promised Land, but they have very few that are won completely by God's power. They had to do fighting. In this one, what did they have to do? March around the city once for six days. Seventh day, march around 7 times. Priests blow the trumpets and everybody shout. I wonder if Joshua thought, that doesn't sound like a battle to me. But we know that story, and it's one of the most wonderful ones in the Word of God. Look down in chapter 6. All these things have happened. Chapter 6 is the battle. Joshua instructs his people, the city is accursed, and all that are in it. Only Rahab, there she's called again, what? The harlot, shall live, she and all that are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. You know, something was clarified in my mind after many years of reading that I've never gotten hold of before. If you would like to write down Deuteronomy 20, 10 through 18. Deuteronomy 20, 10 through 18. This was God's instructions to them when they had to fight. He said, in the land of Canaan, first of all, you go to a city and offer peace if they will be your servants. And then if they won't accept terms of peace, then you fight with the men and you kill all the men. And the women and children and all their stuff is your spoils. But there were 6 nations that God said, you don't keep anything from these people. You kill every man, woman, and child. You take nothing. The silver, gold, and metals would be given to the treasury of God, but everything else is utterly destroyed. Now, I had thought every city in Canaan was utterly destroyed. I just never put that together in my mind. I thought about that studying. When they burned down those cities and killed those people, they didn't have their idols to think about. They didn't know their practices. They would burn down all their writings. And they would burn down all their germs. God said when his people were going in, I'm going to put none of those diseases on you that I put on the Canaanites for their sin. And that's a wonderful purge. That'd get rid of COVID if we want to burn down America. We don't here. But look at verse 19. All the silver and the gold and the brass and the iron are consecrated to the Lord, and they come in the Lord's offering plate. This passage says they are accursed only to the Lord, because you see, the Lord is fighting this battle, and he gets all the spoil. So verses 20 through 22, they shout, the wall falls down flat, at least the part that Rahab's house was not on until they got everybody out. How do you think Rahab and her family felt as they sat out there by the camp of Israel and heard and saw that? Wow. I can't even imagine that. But she is adopted into Israel, and she is married to a man, and they have a son, and his name was Boaz. And he's one of the nicest guys in the Old Testament. We may look at him if we are able to look at Ruth. I want you to look at the long passage there on your sheet from Matthew, where it lists the genealogy of Christ. Now, I have cut and pasted to make it fit, so it's not every verse. But the first verse says it's the generation of Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And amazingly, there are 5 women listed in this genealogy. Women were never in genealogies. Never. God lists 5. The first one is in verse 3, Tamar. Now, if you know the story of her, that's a sordid story, and I won't go into it. But I will tell you, she posed as a prostitute. She had twins fathered by one of the sons of Jacob. And when the midwife was there, a little hand came out first, and the midwife tied a scarlet thread on that hand to know who was born first. But that one floated back up, and the other one came out first. A scarlet thread for Tamar. And then the next one that's listed is Rahab. Was there any scarlet thread there? What she hung out her window. And then the next one is Ruth, who married Rahab's son. And Ruth turned out to be the great-grandmother of King David. Now, you know, when we studied Luke, that's big. The people were looking for a Messiah that was the son of David. And then down in verse 6, there is another woman whose name we know, but her name is not given there. She is just called the wife of Uriah, with whom David committed adultery. And then the last one in verse 16 is Mary. Now, she was not a woman of ill repute. From Scripture, she's a very godly woman. And yet people talked about her like she was. And Jesus, even as an adult, the Pharisees said to him, we're not illegitimate children. We're not SOBs. But you are. 5 women. James dug out a wonderful book for me from his library this week, The Scarlet Thread of the Bible, starting with Genesis, when Adam and Eve had to have an animal killed to clothe them, to cover their sins. I can't even imagine seeing what death was for the first time. All through the sacrifices of the Old Testament, through the death of Christ on the cross, all the suffering of Paul and the apostles preaching, and the book of Revelation. Those who are in the Lamb's book of life have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. That's a scarlet thread. And God draws our attention to it in Matthew, if you know the clues, with Tamar and with Rahab. I love "Oh, for a Thousand Tongues to Sing," and I think I will sing with new gusto that last line. His blood can make the vilest clean. His blood avails for me. So His blood was sufficient for the sins of Rahab. I admire her. She stepped out from everything she knew to listen to God and do what He said. Oh, ladies, may we do such as that. Well, ladies, thank you for your presence.